We've all probably been there, those moments where we feel something has to be absolutely perfect for it to be a permissible outcome or product. But is this really a healthy way to think? Perfectionism can give you overall feelings of control and success and motivation, but in the long run, it may be holding you back and paradoxically decreasing your productivity. In today's video, we'll be taking a closer look at how perfectionism can actually have negative consequences and ways we can manage it. Hello viewers, my name is Dr.Rosy Thachil. I'm a board-certified cardiologist, and welcome to my channel where I talk about all things personal development. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel below, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when I come back with another video. So what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is the constant need to strive for flawlessness. It's a vicious cycle of critical self-evaluations and reaching for high and often unattainable standards. Perfectionism is not necessarily the same as trying to be your best or achieving your highest potential. In fact, on the contrary, it involves ruminating on minutiae. In some ways, because of the digital world we live in, it's very easy to become a perfectionist. For example, on social media, everyone may seem perfect or seem like they have perfect lives, and this may be the standard to which you unknowingly hold yourself to. Having said this, there is a place for healthy perfectionism. For example, in my work as a physician with patient care duties, a healthy amount of perfectionism makes me attentive to details and helps me make sure I don't miss anything. But in other parts of my life, that level of attention to detail may not be necessary. Perfectionism can have positive effects. In healthy amounts, it can be motivating and drive success. But gone unchecked, it can have negative consequences. So perfectionism is definitely a double-edged sword. How do perfectionists act? Serial perfectionists tend to focus on small details and often redo tasks in the pursuit of perfection. There's often a very strong fear of failure, fear of imperfection, or fear of disapproval. And as a result, perfectionists will often procrastinate because perfectionism itself is an unrealistic goal. Perfectionists can also be exceedingly self-critical, and only a perfect outcome is an acceptable one. So this involves binary or black and white thinking. If it's not perfect, then it must be terrible and warrants no merit whatsoever. Oftentimes, the focus is on preventing failure rather than on growing or learning. Here's a deeper dive into how perfectionism can hold us back. Number 1, perfectionism may be related to self-esteem or imposter syndrome. Perfectionism is often related to a need for others' approval of us and a relationship between that approval and our own self-esteem. As you can imagine, this is somewhat maladaptive. When we measure our self-worth by our achievements or others' approval of our activities or outcomes, then we feel the need to be perfect in everything we do. And even small failures and mishaps or learning moments feel like dire failures. Essentially, we become our own harshest critics. Our self-esteem waxes and wanes with the praise or criticism from others. And over time, this cultivates a feeling of never being good enough. Not to mention the stress and anxiety we battle while striving for impossible standards. Number 2, perfectionism forces us into a bubble. Perfectionists strive to master every task thrown at them, down to the smallest detail. That, of course, means that the tasks that can't be mastered in one go, or at the highest levels immediately, tend to be abandoned. Additionally, you'll find that most perfectionists aren't big risk takers. They prefer sticking to one familiar territory, one that provides comfort and a guarantee of success. This means you may lose out on interesting experiences and opportunities that would have otherwise provided growth. It inhibits your creativity and may make it harder for you to see new ideas or opportunities. Perfectionism gives us tunnel vision. Number 3, perfectionism is a root of procrastination. Many perfectionists are chronic procrastinators. They'll put off doing the simplest of tasks out of fear that they won't be able to do it with absolute flawlessness. The barrier to start is very high when your expectations of the outcome are unattainably high. Perfectionism is the enemy of progress, after all. Number 4, perfectionism forces us to avoid failure. Part of the drive behind perfectionism is to avoid failure. But failure is just part of life. Perfectionists have a tendency to avoid challenges or new endeavors that could potentially lead to situations where they don't do well. To some extent, this is human nature. This is why it's so much harder to get yourself to do an activity that you're new at or an amateur at. than an activity that you already know and succeed at. But seizing new opportunities, facing failure, failing forward, and learning from those moments helps us in the long run. Number 5, perfectionism increases stress. As a perfectionist, you'll frequently end up putting an incredible amount of pressure on yourself. Of course, we know that's not healthy at all. When everything needs to be perfect, that can certainly be associated with high levels of stress and anxiety. There's even a meta-analysis of 284 studies that found that perfectionism was associated with clinical depression, anxiety, OCD, and other psychopathology. We probably all have some perfectionist tendencies, and that's not necessarily always a disadvantage. However, it's important to learn to manage it and not to get bogged down with minutiae that don't matter. So here are a few tips. Number 1, vet the situation. Does it require perfectionism? There's an opportunity cost to perfectionist behavior, namely time and energy. So you have to use your perfectionism judiciously. Like I mentioned before, there are certain areas of my life where I'm a bit more of a perfectionist, like when I'm taking care of patients or dealing with high-stakes situations. But other circumstances may not warrant such perfectionism. What activities need to be detail-oriented and which don't? This is important to figure out. In business, there's a term called the minimal viable product, or MVP. It is the most basic or primitive version of a product that will get the job done. It's not necessarily the most perfect or sophisticated version of that product, but in some situations, the MVP, or minimal viable product, may be enough. And over time, it gets iterated and perfected. So focus more on enjoying the process instead of the results. Also focus on the overall or big picture rather than purely minutia. You could probably spend an extra 5 hours trying to make a PowerPoint presentation perfect, but does that extra 5 hours really translate into extra impact? If it doesn't, it may not be worth your time. Number 2, accept failure and imperfection. Failing forward is a unique skill that we often have to embrace. Life can feel like 99% failure and 1% success. Nothing will be perfect on the first try, so think of failure as a course correction. It's an opportunity to learn important lessons and learn. You tend to learn more from failures and imperfect moments than your perfect and successful ones. You have to sort of readjust your mindset towards suboptimal outcomes. Number 3, understand why you're engaging in perfectionism. If you're going to stop being a perfectionist, you have to understand why you are one in the first place. Essentially, you have to challenge your own behavior and way of thinking. Perfectionism is essentially a form of fear, fundamentally a fear of failing. I think wrapping your head around the worst case scenario can often be helpful. For example, if you're preparing a meeting pitch, let's say, what's the worst that could happen if it's not perfect? Someone will critique it and discard it, but that's okay. Once you understand that you're actually capable of dealing with the worst case scenario, it's easier to manage that fear of failure and the perfectionism that comes with it. At the end of the day, perfectionism isn't all bad, but we have to learn to manage it and use it judiciously and strategically with a growth mindset. Ideally, we want to leverage the positive attributes of perfectionism while leaving out the anxieties and fear of failure. The idea is to be an adaptive perfectionist who uses perfectionism as a motivator for growth. And that's a wrap for this video. Let me know in the comments below whether you deal with perfectionism and how you manage it. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.